is looking into it to how can we rebuild that hand which has been cut off for certain unfortunate reasons, and it can be controlled as in a natural way what we do when we are perfectly fine. So instead of being very mechanical and just having switches and just trying to think in that terms, can we have a control of brain to take care of the movements of that artificial hand? And as you can see in the picture, it's it's just trying to say that can we do a shake hand? So that's where I just thought, okay, when we are talking about BCI, brain-computer interface, we have to think in terms of repairing or rebuilding or doing both, or in what terms. So that's where the thought came, as just to focus a bit of on repairing or rebuilding. Here it comes to as a neuro components of the neuroprosthetics. Here you can see that it consists of medical applications, visual impairment, hearing impairment, sensory inputs. Again, talking on the right-hand side, right top corner, it's epilepsy, communication disability, and other kinds of things, and motor inputs. But if you look as a technologist, we are mostly interested in the bottom triangular part of it, where it is talking about bioengineering, next generation technology, or electronic engineering. Probably you might be thinking, okay, I have started with the brain-computer interface, and all of a sudden the topic of our headline comes out to be as a neuroprosthetics. Well, it is there is a lot of discussion, and there is a lot of thing which is coming into the picture as what has to be used. Is it good to use both, or can we do it? In a sense, it's arguably we can say that it's not a bad idea to exchange these words BCI or neuroprosthetics. Because what neuroprosthetics is, it is basically something which is dealing with the nerves and biomedical engineering, and connecting these two things and giving a support to it. Whereas in BCI, it is basically mostly focused because of the term computer. So brain is connected to the computer. So in a broader perspective, computer can be talked in many different ways. But the moment we say computer, we just think of laptop and desktops and things like that. So here is a device which is called as Cochlear hearing implant, and this is something which I just thought, okay, is something which we can feel proud of it, as that is one of the most successful thing so far in really helping out the concept of BCI or neuroprosthetics. It is basically, and the reason for the and other devices are like amputees, like legs or hands, or those artificial legs or hands. They are one of the most successful things. When we say most successful things, means a lot of people are using it. I was just looking at some of the data here while preparing these slides. So it's about 200,000 people in USA. They are using these kinds of hearing implants. And one can think of it that, okay, we are taking the information from the brain and trying to transmit it to the brain. It's kind of not as what we see as a computer, but it is involving all sorts of processing power, which makes it successful. So let's look at it a bit more of it, how Cochlear implant works. Cochlear implant is an electronic device that partially restores hearing. Cochlear implants uses a sound processor that it fits behind the ear. The processor captures sound signals and sends them to receiver implanted under the skin behind the ear. The receiver sends the signal to the electrodes implanted in the small shaped inner ear, that is called as cochlea. That is, you can see it here. Basically, part is called as a cochlea, which is somewhere here in the ear. And this signal stimulates the auditory nerve, which then directs them to brain. The brain interprets those signals as sounds. So this is, in a true sense, is a BCI, is an example of BCI. And it's not something which we can say it's just an hearing aid. Hearing aid is something which amplifies the sounds. And it amplifies the sounds. Of course, there are a lot of sophisticated hearing aids are there, but it's a complete different way of is restoring the sound. And that's why this example perfectly fits with the talk and with the topic, which is a BCI, which is brain computer interface. So you can see that a lot of processing is going on, which exactly we do when we talk about when we think about computers. Of course, it's not something which is visual, which we can see it, but it is more of a sound, which is related with the sound. Still, the challenges goes with this one is that still the sound is not as the same as with the natural one. And at the same time, probably we all know that why the nature has given us 2 years. It's mainly because of getting a stereo sound. That is also a problem. People have come up with a lot of research into it to give the directionality of also as well. Directionality concept also has come into to the hearing aid also, putting an array of microphones, and from there they are trying to calculate. But still, it's a challenge. It's not the same as when I say directionality. Probably when you are standing somewhere and you can feel from where the sound is coming from. That is where this is a big challenge also with the people who have either using hearing aid or these kinds of implants. Also, the directionality is still a big challenge, and the quality of sound, definitely it's there. They can hear it, but it's not the same as what we hear from our with the natural way of natural hearing. So here comes is the block diagram. Basically, you can see here is the brain. They are talking about how the brain signals. We capture it. I'm sorry, it is not very clear. I thought it will come out to be very clear in a big picture, but it's non-invasive. It's on the surface. You put the electrode. Partially invasive. It means you just go. It's not just on the surface of the brain. You just get in a little bit in. And also complete invasive. From there, you get the signals. By the way, I just wanted to share this thing, that why this hearing implants or cochlear implant and the amputees work, because they sit on the edge of the nervous system. And it's much more easier for us to replace them and to use them. When it comes to a completely invasive thing, it's very difficult to manage it. And because it's still the brain, no matter what advances we have, still the brain is something which is a very complex organ, and we are still trying to understand. We do know that, okay, there are electrons, there are these neurons, and they communicate with each other, and that's where the electrical signals are being produced. I have in this slide, but that is what is the reason for these hearing, this cochlear implant and the amputees to work, because they are sitting on the edge of our neural system, and they are much easier to replace and to do experimental work and things like that. So here, this is what is non-invasive, partially invasive, and invasive. We get the electrical signals. We get the electrical signals, which is converted into some code, and then it comes to the feature extraction, then algorithm, and from there give a decision and control. Computer or some kind of a device, it's a wheelchair or a more sophisticated, just like as I was talking about a hand, which can be controlled with our thoughts. That okay, Sumit is here, Rohit is here, they have thanked me, let me go and have a shake hand. Or just now in these days with the corona, not to shake hand, just to have a fist touching. I would be more interested because I come from vision and from mathematics background. I'm more interested with feature extraction and an understanding about the functioning of brain. Why do I say this? Because feature extraction, if we just look in an isolation, it's a very nice thing. Say, for example, I give you the face recognition. Face recognition in a controlled environment is kind of a very much solved problem. There, what it does is that, okay, you take the features, find out whether face is there or not, and you can recognize the human being also. So algorithm can recognize whether it's Sumit or not, and all those biometric systems are working on there. The most popular and most widely used feature extraction when we do face recognition is a HAR feature. But if you look at a HAR feature, it does not have any connection with why it works, and at the same time, it does not tells you that whether this HAR feature has something where our brain is also working in that fashion. So my attraction, my passion, or my motivation to work on the feature extraction, not only from a total mathematics point of view, but to understand why how the brain perceives and how the brain extracts the features. And in that case, I'm more interested in, instead of face recognition, I'm more interested in problems like recognition of cartoons. So recognition of cartoons is still one of the most challenging and difficult problems. You see a cartoon, and with, say for example, it's Indira Gandhi. So you, based on some nose, you still immediately say that the cartoon is of Indira Gandhi or Manmohan Singh. I don't know what makes me. Of course, we have seen so many pictures of Indira Gandhi. We have seen so many pictures of our leaders and all these Bollywood stars. And as soon as the cartoon comes, we are more or less 99% we are able to recognize who this person is, what this cartoon is referring to. So it means that it is not something which brain has gone through all of it to recognize it. Of course, it has seen, but then it has stored some important information in the brain, and from there it is trying to retrieve and trying to reconstruct it, and will able to say that this cartoon is of whoever it is. So. No, I'm just saying the brain does it. I'm more important trying to understand how brain is perceiving. So you're saying the one cartoon, you're extracting some features into that. No, I'm just talking about this kind of a problem. I'm not talking about how to solve this problem. I'm talking from the feature. So why my feature extraction with an understanding about the functioning of brain. Okay, so say for example, like as you are talking, normal course of action for cartoon detection or cartoon recognition will be, okay, so just have important features, nose tilt like this one, this one. But cartoons are not exactly the node tilting at 30, nose lines are tilting at 60 degree and 30 degree. Your algorithm will fail. In most of the cases, algorithm will fail the moment the orientation changes or something else changes. So, but our brain doesn't fail. And still, it's an open kind of a question. What are those features? When it has seen something which is an exact picture, out of that, it has taken out some information. And then when some cartoon comes, I'm still able to recognize. Can I do something on that? That's my interest. That's what makes me motivated to get into this area. That's what I'm trying to say here. So we are mostly into this feature extraction algorithm. When we say algorithm, it is mostly of classification, whether it's a face, it's non-face, do this action, do that action. All these things are there, and that's where you decide based on those features what is there to be taken as an action. And that's what the algorithms part does. Now we have all these support vector machine regression analysis, neural network, deep learning, RNN, all sorts of machine learning techniques are there, and they are doing it.
What type of features you are extracting?
What
type of features you are extracting? So it is in numeric form or it is in pixel? Excel form?
See, this is what it's still a tricky thing to understand. There are mostly two ways to extract this information from the brain. One is these electrical ones, and the other one is through eyes or visual one. And there are very preliminary experiments are being done. They just have a kind of a psychological test onto it. Okay, can you see this dot? And then try to figure it out whether which brain part has been activated and those kinds of things. Still, it's not there in that fashion that which features have been brain has extracted. That's the still mystery with them. So here it comes out to be, it's a very self-explanatory kind of a slide, BCI input and output. As a human being, we think about it, okay, let's move the cursor. My hand goes to the mouse and start moving it instead of thinking and just being connected to the computer and say, okay, the cursor should move from one part of the screen to the other part of the screen. So this is what the BCI input and output. How the BCI, why it works? Mainly, every time we think, move, or feel, there are basically the signals which are coming out, and that work is carried out by small electric signals that zip from neurons to neurons as fast as 250 miles per hour. The signals are generated by difference of electric potential carried by ions on the membrane of each neurons. You will be surprised. I'm sure some of you probably know already about it, that there is when the information is being transferred, it is through something called as myelin. It's actually is encapsulated, but somehow nature is also not 100% perfect in that sense. Somehow some signal information is leaked. And that's what we have those, because of those leaks, those electrodes capture that information. But it is mostly being as a covered one, which does not allow or which does not give the complete information. The signal, what the electric signal we get is not a complete one. It's a partial which is being leaked. And you can see that here, this is what we escaped electric signals. That is what is being talking about. Escaped electric signal, and some of the electrical signals escapes, which can be detected, interpreted, and use them to direct a device of some kind. That's what we are looking into it, and that's why this BCI, because the signals are being coming out from the brain, and that they are electric signals, and based on that we study those signals and trying to devise and trying to work on that. So the history in terms of, let's talk about it. So Hans Berger, a German, discovered the electrical activity of human brain and the development of EEG. That was done in 1924 for the first time. And that's how this main, from a scientific and from a technology point of view, the BCI, the concept of BCI started taking place. Of course, this name came very later on the picture, but it was a very basic, rudimentary kind of a device which was taking out the signal. But that's where the whole start was there. Before that, it was mostly talking in terms about the brain is from the medical science, where they do the surgery and they try to understand, or from the philosophical point of view. Talking of brain goes way more than before that, and some of them, they were saying that it is just a radiator which is kept on top of the heart and whatnot. I mean, all sorts of things were there. Lots of definitions and things started coming up. But as a science or as a technical person, this is what one started with thinking, okay, the signal is coming, which we can record and we can talk about it, what that signal looks like. Can we see that, okay, if some disease is there, so what are different pattern recognition, and those things started evolving slowly afterwards. So here is again history. So you can see in 1924, the first time the EEG signals were recorded. But the concept of BCI came by in 1973. There was this paper towards brain-computer communication. In this, 1973, the term BCI was talked about it and was coined. Then in 1988, a non-invasive EEG control of physical object, a robot, the EEG control of multiple start, stop, restart of the robot movement along an arbitrary trajectory defined by a line drawn on the floor. So this was one of the major breakthroughs after this. Also in 1990, a closed loop bidirectional adaptive BCI controlling computer buzzer by an anticipatory brain potential, CNV potential. This was also talked. Then in 2010, a study suggested the potential ability of neural simulations to restore the functional connectivity and associated behavior through modulation of molecular mechanism of synaptic efficacy. All these things slowly come up, and then in 2014, you have heard about this robot, which was named as Sophia. That started, and now we see it. But still, it is more of, I would say, in a primitive stages, doing basic functionalities, trying to understand the logic. A lot of things needs to be done. It's good to have these kinds of evolutions and these kinds of innovations coming up. They always give you a lot of inputs and insights to work on certain other directions as well. Now here comes is that how and why I got interested with this cognition. As Dr. Sumit has also mentioned, I was working on X-ray dose reduction. Usually what happens is that I was part of a team, and I was lucky enough to see be into an operation theater. This time is running out. Time is there. Okay. So I mean, I was working on it, and I always worried about it. Why do we need that high quality images? Because when we compare with natural images and medical images, the difference is that natural images, the concept of beauty is very different when it comes to the medical images. In natural images, beauty is okay. It's contrast is very high, sharpness is there, how the colors are being matched up, all sorts of things. That is concept of the beauty. When it comes to the medical images, it is more of an information rather than in terms of beauty or in terms of contrast. Of course, when there is a contrast, and again, it's a very much of a dispute saying in terms of contrast or all those sharpnesses. Because I have seen it when we talk about Siemens machines, the images are not coming out to be as sharp as other company machines, like for example Philips. If you see that there is a lot of sharpness, you see very crispiness with the images, medical images, and what happens is that the doctors who are used to use, I mean, I think that may be because of a copyright or this proprietary thing or the companies wants that if some doctors get used to my machine, they should not move to the other company's machine. I don't know. I mean, this can be a very tricky thing to talk about, but that's what I guess a feel, because when we talked about it, the hospitals who were using Philips machines or GE machines, they are always saying, okay, I like this kind of image quality. And what we see is fine. So if you ask somebody who has over the years practiced and looking at the images coming from Philips, and if you ask them to work with the Siemens images, there is a bit of hesitation. And that's how I started thinking. It means that our brain is basically tuned in looking at certain images in certain fashion. And so I was part of one requirement gathering, and I was into an operation theater where this angioplasty was happening. And it's really a very dirty and bloody game. Doctor cardiologist is just doing an operation, it's blood and all sorts of things. And he keeps saying, this was my observation, and he keeps saying that, okay, pump maro, means asking the operator to have this, what you call is paddle where it increase the X-ray dosage. As you increase the X-ray dosage, it will have a better and better image quality. So I was thinking, and what happens, I mean, it's okay to have a better image quality, but it's not the patient, it's mostly the cardiologist. That's the survey says, and statistically it has been shown that the cardiologists who are practicing and doing this angioplasty, they have a high chance of developing a thoracic cancer. So because they are more exposed to the X-rays. So even if you cover it up and take a protection, yes, the chances reduces, but still they don't just go away, because rays are rays. They can go to or hit you in different ways. And patient is there for 20 minutes, 15 minutes, 25 minutes, half an hour, depending on the complexity of the problem. But it is the doctor or the cardiologist who is looking day in, day out, at least 4, 5, 6 patients in a day. So I thought, why do we have to have it? Can we do something where my image quality parameters can be automatically set based on an individual doctor? So instead of saying that, okay, image quality is 0, means completely worse, 1, be perfect, it's not necessary to work in these two, this perfect condition. Can we do something where we can have something which is in between as a gray scale, a gray point, and doctor can say, okay, I'm perfect with, say, for example, 0.7 kind of an image quality index. Or somebody can say, I'm perfect with, I'm fine with 0.6. So once that hit is there, so that's how you are trying to reduce the X-ray dosage based on an individual. It's not working on as a complete black box. Okay, this system is going to give this month, or if you want to have this, then you keep increasing the X-ray dosage. That's how I got into it, and that's how I started working on this. So here you can see that this is some images of when the angioplasty is going on. So what they do is they puncture this femur artery here and then put the guide wire, and it goes on. And the reason why they have to take the X-ray images, all the time, because they wanted to see where the stent is getting fixed. Once you deflate it, you cannot move it. So here, this is what, you can see that I don't know, here you can see this. This is the inflated balloon, and this is what the guide wire is coming out. So here it is. Probably for you, it's not visible because you are seeing it for the first time, but I can very clearly see that this is going like this, right? It is going like this. So my thought was, because these doctors, they see these kinds of images day in, day out. Probably they don't need it to have that kind of a sharp image quality. So I did an experiment, a psychological experiment. I took similar kind of these images, and then what I did is made them small blocks with varying shapes, and I have shown to the person who has never seen those kinds of images, and asked them to keep throwing on what you call is on the screen, and asking 3 types of questions. Can you see some line? Can you see? You can't see a line, maybe or may not be. The person can be confused whether it's a line. I would say, oh, yes or no. And I started increasing the block size. Still, it's all random. And then finally got into the complete picture. And then say, okay, now please draw that line which we were talking about. And then did the reverse order. And when I was doing the reverse order, I have seen in almost all cases where they were not able to see before that guide wire, where it was already present, they are able to see it. Where the confusion was there is no confusion. So the experiment gave me, once you see it, you are highly likely to recognize it. And when you are looking at it multiple times, chances are very high for you to recognize what that object is, or can you see that object. And that is what my first experiment, and since then I have been always interested to work on this kind of a thing. And also I got one patent on that, and it's working with the psychometric functions. I was able to design some kind of mathematics behind it. So this was something which which was my starting point and made me to go for what you call is more into the cognition and more into the understanding how the brain extracts the features when they see some objects. So next thing was always because as you have noted, I just did my PhD in mathematics and then moved to the signal processing and image processing in electrical engineering department. That was my first time my postdoc supervisor has asked me, why do we have two eyes? So the answer is we want to have depth perception. And if we have one eye, then it means we are going a unidirectional, and we will have to manage with that one view only. And you can see here, this is what the eye is and how the neurons and everything is acting. And now you can see that there is a cup with some tea and a spoon. You can see from there two eyes, and that's how it's being communicated. And we have two views being created. Because mathematically in linear algebra, we teach about all the time from 3D to 2D, it's not a reversible transformation. So we cannot get the information if I have only one view of a 3D object. I cannot get the one dimension is lost, and that cannot be recovered. So for that, at least we need two views. And from there, it is there. So, but that's a very natural thing and very nice thing to know about it, that yes, why we have two eyes, why we have two ears, stereo sound. But at the same time, I have done this experiment by myself, keeping my one eye closed for 2 days and just walking around and thinking that, will I lose the depth perception? Because now I'm looking at with one eye. And it was not. It was there. Depth perception was there. It's not the same object I'm looking. I was moving around different places, keeping my one eye closed with the bandage. Now what happens? What functioning of the brain keeps that information? Still you are looking at only one image, but something is there in the brain which keeps it, and you are able to still perceive the depth. That is something very intriguing and makes me passionate about understanding how the brain features. I still don't have an answer, but I just thought to share it to have that as a curiosity developed in the audience. And there is one very interesting example. There was a person named Bruce. He was in England, and he was having from childhood, he was having a deficiency with the both eyes. He was not able to perceive the depth. And somehow something might have happened. I don't know, because the biggest challenge also comes in the brain functioning is to understand the brain. But when we start understanding or collecting the information, we are so small as a child, don't know what is happening. Okay, so that person doesn't know whether it is by birth or it happened just some kind of a disease or some problem happened. But over the years he has realized. But after in 2012 or in 2014, after 70 years just being with not perceiving the depth, this guy just was reluctantly gone with his wife to see a 3D movie. And he bought you have to take special glasses for that. And to a surprise, he got it back. Don't know what happened. So from there, something has happened, and it's a very intriguing. Here we have one security guard also. And I have asked him, and he had unfortunate accident, and he just fell, and his one eye lost the vision. He tried to get it, but unfortunately, he couldn't get it. And from time to time, I keep asking, can you see the things far away or near and all that? He said, no, I don't have any problem. It's just only that one eye doesn't blink and it looks very odd. But still, he's able to perceive through one eye the depth and everything. So I have done the experiment for 2 days by closing my eye, and this guy is, I think it's more than 2 or 3 years. He's still having. So what happens what information or what makes it brain to keep that, so that still we are able to reconstruct or do things as normal. So it's an interesting thing. That's what I was trying to say, is that is going for me to have a bit of more motivation for this cognition thing. And so cognition nowadays, if I look cognition, I mean that from block diagram, signal acquisition, feature extraction, and algorithms. Lot of advances are being done, and people are still working how sophisticated we can have the electrodes so that we can have signals without noise. Also advances in visual understanding. Also functional magnetic MRI, they are trying to get all sorts of information. They also work in collaboration with it. It's always always there is something which is different groups working and concentrating on how to make that department or that block better and better. So this is mostly the hardware side. Then it comes to the feature extraction side. They always try to say that, okay, whatever the signal you are giving to us, let's work on something so that I can have better and better feature extraction. And then the machine learning people will come, okay, how to define or how to design best possible classifiers. So these are all groups. They have overlap. They have to understand a bit of each other's domain, but they focus mostly on this one. The challenge still is the performance and reliability of BCI devices. It's still the main challenge. Performance is not as good as it is. And one of the major regions, I mean, people are able to get good signals, lot of information coming from because of this functional MRI, all sorts of things, but the non-stationarity of brain function. That's the biggest challenge. And probably we all can understand the things when becomes non-stationary and non-linear. One of my professors used to say, break your head on the wall rather than working on a nonlinear problem. So it's always a very, very difficult thing to get into it. And we are still, in many ways, we have moved a lot of, we have covered a lot of distance, but still not to the level where we can be complacent or we can think, okay, we have arrived, that kind of a thing. So at Shiv Nadar University, my focus again, I'm more into a visual kind of a thing. So representation and recognition in vision, that is what my main topic, my main focus is, and that's where I work. What is the nature of visual representation, how it's related to perception, how this can be related to support the action. So these are the three things. So when I say what is the nature of visual representation, I'm more interested to solve and look these kinds of questions. So two people seeing the cat on a mat, are they seeing the same thing? Yes, at the end output, they are seeing the same thing. But how they are seeing, what is, am I also extracting the same features when I say look at a cat as Sumit or Rohit? Are they also looking, first they look for the tail and head, or what they look for it? And that's what finally it says that it's a cat. These kinds of questions are interesting to me, and I have done some work. I have yet to publish it. Perception is always something which is very interesting. Definitely, once you are having that kind of then it comes off more of designing of an electrical thing or a more of a device and interface, how to support those actions. Perfect reconstruction using sparsity. This is what one of my PhD students, she is working onto it. And I will come back to, again, the same thing. When we see a cartoon, I'm able to perfectly reconstruct. My brain is perfectly reconstructing Indira Gandhi when I see a cartoon of Indira Gandhi. It's not looking at what the cartoon is. It's making an image, a perfect reconstruction of the face of Indira Gandhi. And that's how I'm saying this cartoon is of Indira Gandhi, or this cartoon is of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, whoever it is, or Modi, whatever. So what are the information I should have collected when I see a perfect image, so that when I don't see much of information, I is still able to reconstruct it. And that is where my PhD student, she is working on the area. So say, for example, and this is the area which I have worked for a long time in oncology care system, that when a patient is diagnosed with a cancer, so there are three treatments in modern medicine, either surgery or chemotherapy or radiation, or a mix of these. All three, you can have a hybrid. So this is the way to treat a cancer patient. If it has been decided that, okay, this patient has to go through the radiation. So depending on the condition and what kind of, how big the cancer is, that goes into multiple stages of treatment. When it goes for multiple stages of treatment, so every time what the doctor or the hospital and the process says, it has to go through the full 3D reconstruction. And when the patient is being transferred to from the CT machine to the linear accelerator, where the X-ray will be given, then again do the patient positioning, and multiple times of CT reconstruction or image reconstruction happens. We are working on the area where we can say that when we have first image, reconstructive image, or say, let's say 2 or 3 times the patient is gone through the complete reconstruction with all what should I say, all the projections and everything with a perfect signal which needs to do the reconstruction. But after that, do I need those many projections, or do I need that much of information to do a perfect reconstruction? Because it's the same body. It's the same anatomy. The only thing is changing is some size of the tumor or the place of the tumor, depending on which part of the body the cancer is. So for example, if it's a prostate cancer, it moves a lot. Say for in the brain, if it is there, it doesn't move at all. It just shrinks. So it depends on which part of the body the cancer is. That area is changing, but not the whole anatomy. So say for example, patient positioning. You don't need it to have a complete information. You can do it with partial information because you already have taken it. So how can I extract the information? And if I just get more into the mathematical terms, can I form the basis function from that information which I have already had it, use that basis function and take partial information for the next subsequent sittings of the patient and do a perfect reconstruction. So that is where the perfect reconstruction using is sparsity. That is what is I'm interested in. My PhD student is working on that. Because a lot of other companies have promised if we can show some mathematical results. So thankfully, and fingers crossed, her PhD can be sponsored by the industry. So that's a good thing for her and for me as well. So this is what I'm always was looking at. I have worked in that. Probably you can ask why I have chosen this, because I have a huge experience working in Siemens in the medical domain. So I know all the processes, all sorts of how the machines work, or how the whole program is there. So that's why I have taken this. But I would be interested into extending this for normal scenarios. And also interested, say, for example, like if you have heard of a song many times, the moment the first 2 tones are there, you are able to tell what that sound is. You are perfectly able to reconstruct it. So I'm trying to work on that kind of, that's my, these are the 2 topics which I'm mostly focusing on it. And with this, let's have some interesting thing. Here I will just have a video which is showing a very interesting but a basic kind of BCI. So here this guy is showing us that how he has with his roommate has done and thought about it. Because I mean, his initial thing is what he's saying is that there are so many patients and people who have with neural disorders or they need to be attended or wanted to have some devices which needs to be controlled by the nervous system or by the brain, but there is not enough publicity as well as motivation for younger generation when they are in the schools to get motivated and start working in this area. So that's why he has designed a system where he is trying to show that how to control the hand and what happens if a hand movement is there, how the signals are being how the signals look like, and then he tries to connect with the two people. One is moving the hand, and through that the other is also able to move the hand in the same direction while it's free. It's the other person is not doing any control. It is just being controlled by the other person in that. So that's what he's talking about it. It's what he says that it is school boys also. I mean, school students from 10th or 12th standard can do it. So let's have some fun. I mean, can we have some video for this, at least for this audience here? So you can see, I mean, it's very self-explanatory. I mean, of course, some nice way of talking is involved. So some fun is also there, which probably you will miss it. Yes, these electrodes. So you're saying that, okay, just raise your fist, do it with power. So you see some tension on this, and that's where then again, he will show you this. So you can see that, okay. So once you raise that, then you can see that signal coming up. Now he will show it stress, and then you can see that how the movements of the peak is there. The peak is talking about raising the fist. So that's not only the thing. Now this guy comes, and then he will also put the electrodes on his hand as well. And she will basically, when she will raise, then his hand will also start accordingly, and the fist will start moving. He's asking, can you feel something? And initially he says no. I'm sure there is some. Then now once it's connected. Now you start feeling. So I'm sorry, I don't know what went wrong. So you missed that fun part, but at least technical part you are able to see it. Okay, so this was.
Okay, we understood the sensing part, sir. How is doing actuation part, sir?
I mean that he has not disclosed that. No. So then something is there. So finally, I mean, Department of Mathematics, I'm going to offer some courses in cognition science, more emphasis to the science than philosophy, not just a philosophy. I mean, cognition can be taken from different perspectives. A lot of people still talk from the philosophical point of view, and hopefully we can offer a minor in cognitive science and machine learning. Still, I feel that a lot of information or a lot of focus is on going on the capturing of EEG signals or visual experiments and things like that. Not yet much has been done about how the memory is there in the brain, how that has been stored, what happens with those kinds of things. So with the cognitive science courses, I'm trying to work on that and trying to do, and those courses will be for very basic courses, don't need much of prerequisites. So thinking that, okay, if a student comes in the first year or second year, they can start doing rather than not having a lot of prerequisites. So that's there. And last is, okay, references. Unfortunately, it was too much for me to put all the references. So I don't claim any images or any sentence is mine. It's all the thought process and the combination of everything is mine, but all the images and everything is from the web or YouTube. So thank you very much. And once again, I would like to thank Rohit and Sumit for giving me this opportunity to talk about. Thanks.
So, thank you, sir, for this wonderful talk. So, I would like to ask my audience, maybe some audience from online and some are in offline mode. So they can ask question, and please, this is request to all participants, please be here for more 5 minutes so that we can click some photos, online photo for online and offline both. So thank you all. Please ask questions if anybody have. And offline students, for offline students, I am requesting please be loud so that the online people also listen the question. Yeah.
No, sure.
So is there any surgery required to implant this audio or video?
Yes. Yes. It's the moment it gets invasive, and that's why I mean, when it's on the edge of it or in the periphery of the system, it's much more easy. That's what this cochlea, this hearing implant is working, because it's at the edge of it. So you don't need. So still a lot of problem is there to decide there.
So you need to cast the nerve here.
It's more of periphery.
How the BCI is different to Neuralink, sir? How Neuralink? This is we are seeing Neuralink. The monkey is playing the game.
Oh, okay. These are all experiments being done and trying to understand how the brain functions. So it's kind of, one can think of as a and I can very well connect it with one of the things is that when we are working with the image reconstruction or with some kind of a treatment, and it involves X-ray dosage or something hazardous thing, we don't use the human bodies. Initially, we use the dummies, which are being replicated, and you won't believe that Siemens spends or Philips or GE, I'm sure they spend a lot of time and money on just replicating the body organs. So I know one person, his name was Robin. He just had this hand replicated in silicon with the structure, so you can feel it that the nerves are going and the blood and everything is it's just a complete replica of the hand, and it took him 2 years to do it. So Neuralink is, one can connect it with this, that okay, we are not going directly to the humans. Okay, so dealing with directly with humans and experimenting, I mean, who is going to until and unless somebody is saying, okay, now I'm in a condition where it doesn't matter whether I live or I die. Either that kind of person will agree. Usually, it is somebody who's normal will not agree to that kind. So that's why the rats or guinea pigs or monkeys or these, and monkeys are much more in because we think of that we are monkeys are our relative and ancestors. That's why it is so. Yeah, there is one video. I thought, okay, I was wanted to put it, but I thought then it will be too much to put the video.
Is it possible for you to create those features when you are reconstructing this? What type of features you are extracting when you are doing this reconstruction?
Okay, I can tell you. I mean, you can come sometime. It's a long thing, so I'll tell you.
So any other question from online participants? Please ask questions. So it seems there is no other question. So
Naren Shukla, your mic is mute.
okay.
Yes, sir. No question. I liked your concept of this cochlear implant, where you talked about real brain-computer interface as opposed to hearing aid. So, as a passing reference, I'd just like to mention work done at Harvard Medical School by one of my ex-student, and he is working on very interesting concept. What he told, just that idea occurred to me that in order to make blind people see what they are doing, they're not kind of creating extra implant, extra sensory aid, I mean to say. For eyes, what they're doing, they're directly implanting an AI pre-trained chip on the visual cortex. So it's not correcting the sensor errors, it's basically correcting the neurological path from sensor to the brain. So very interesting work he's doing, and I don't know how much he'll get the support for human testing.
Trying to bypass the what you call this the disordered or the damaged part.
Right.
Directly.
Right.
So that's why that's why I thought, okay, it is very important to make the difference between repairing and rebuilding.
Right.
So in repairing, it's always the thought, because it's all about the thought, how you think about it, how you try to handle the problem. So when somebody is thinking of repairing, then they are not looking into bypassing anything. I mean, they are trying to improve the quality. So say, for example, dementia or epilepsy or these kinds of, or memory loss at the old age, they are trying to find out what are the reasons when it gets into that kind of a mode, and how can we regenerate those cells, or is it possible to regenerate? So that's a repair part. Whereas we as a technology people mostly concentrate. I mean, there is always going to be a bit of an overlap, that's for sure. But we are mostly thinking of okay, can we do something extra and can we bypass that? So that's why it's a rebuilding of.
Right, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Nice to see you, Naren, after so long.
Yes, sir. Sometime I'll come to campus and meet you.
Sure.
So any other question from audience? So I would like to invite Dr. Rohit for a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Sumit. So I would like to thank my speaker for a very vibrant and wonderful talk. And we are also got to know so many new concepts, like the interfacing of the brain with some electrodes. That was really interesting. And I would like to thank Dr. Varun Kakkar, Chair Young Professionals Committee, UP section, for backend support for each step. And I am thankful to IEEE Young Professionals Region 10, IEEE Region 10 to support the event, and Department of Mechanical and Electrical Engineering, Sivanadar University NCR campus for providing a wonderful platform. And I'm also thankful to our PhD students Mani and Purna for their supports in the various manners. And finally, thankful to all the participants to make the event like. So, thank you all.
Thank you all. Everyone, thanks. Sumit, and hopefully we something similar later on with more precise. Maybe I'll show you some of the work and show that work I was talking about construction.
So this is request to all participants, please on your camera if possible. So we can take some photos. So that will be great. You can stop sharing. So.
Okay.
Yes. No, fine.
Everyone, please turn on the camera for a few minutes. Now you can go to large gallery view. Large gallery. One is gallery view. Large gallery. No issue. He will take. So, Mani, done? Yeah. Thank you all. Thank you so much for participation. So we will provide certificates soon at your mail ID. Thank you.
Thank you so much.